All right, so first today we're looking at section 14, which is entitled In Bethlehem, which is Matthew 2, 1 to 12. As we begin this, we see that Matthew starts by saying, now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king. And so your first questions have to do with that context. So number 95, research or remember. If you've taken world history, you should remember this. Who was this king in Jerusalem? Who was this king?
Herod the Great.
Herod the Great. How many had Herod the Great? All right, great. Because there's more than one Herod. If you look down below at your genealogical chart, you'll see the Herod family. And you can see that there's Herod the Great, and then there are other, he had several sons that he named Herod, and some later a grandson named Herod. So there are different Herods, so we need to be able to keep them straight. This one is Herod the Great. Number 96, was he a descendant of David? Marissa?
No.
No, he was not. Hopefully you got that right. And if not, from where did he come? Well, that's a long story, so let me just kind of summarize it for you. We won't count this one as a point for you. Herod the Great was not an Israelite. He's not Hebrew, not a Jew. It goes back in the time after the Old Testament is concluded. And if you had world history, this will be a little review for you. If you haven't, we'll give more detail in that. I'm just going to give you a quick overview. During the time between the Old Testament and the New Testament, a man came into that part of the world from Greece, whose name was Alexander. And he conquered much of the known world, more than anybody had before. And so he is called Alexander the Great. How many have heard of Alexander the Great? Okay. Unfortunately for him, before he got a chance to really consolidate his empire and begin ruling it, he died. And so that was something that they weren't prepared for. His troops weren't prepared for, his generals, because his son was not yet old enough to take over. So they decided that what they would do is split the empire into 4 parts for the 4 generals that were serving Alexander. And so they did that. Well, one general, his name was Seleucid, and he was in charge of the area up in here, mostly Syria and down into towards the land of Canaan. Another of the generals was Ptolemy, and he had control of Egypt and also of this direction. So we find that for a long time there's a great conflict between the Seleucid family and the Ptolemy family, and they're always fighting, and it seems like a lot of it takes place in the land of Israel. And Israel has a large part to play in all. I won't go into all the details. It's very interesting. It reads like a soap opera. And in fact, Daniel, in Daniel chapter 11, outlines the different events that would take place in the future. And it's interesting to see how exact those things are. But eventually, the ruler of the Seleucid family, considered the Syrians at this point, although they're of Greek descent, his name is Antiochus Epiphanes. And he comes down, there's been a lot of intrigue before this, but he finally comes down and decides he's going to finally take over Egypt. He's tried before. He's going to make an attempt now. He thinks the time is right. But some ships arrive from Cyprus that are Roman ships. Rome has just begun to expand into this area. And they stop him from taking over Egypt. That makes him really angry. And so on his way back home to Syria, he has to go through Jerusalem, which he's in charge of. He's the ruler. And he decides he's really mad at the Jewish people because they will not give in to the Greek culture that he wants to establish there. He wants everybody to be the same, everybody to be like the Greeks. And the Jews won't do it. And so he goes in and outlaws circumcision, outlaws sacrifices in the temple. In fact, he goes into the temple and offers a pig, kills a pig on the altar, which of course was an unclean animal for the Jewish people, sprayed pig juice all over the temple to desecrate the temple, forced priests to offer pigs, making them unclean and unable to function as a priest, until finally one priest won't do it, and he turns on the person who is out there with the soldiers that are trying to force him in the area of Modin and attacks them. His name is Mattathias, and he and his sons then begin a revolution against Antiochus Epiphanes. The son who was the leader, his name was Judas, and he was given the nickname Maccabeus, which means the hammer. And so it became known as the Maccabean Revolt. Eventually they are successful. They defeat Antiochus Epiphanes. They take over Israel again. They take over Jerusalem and the temple. But they've got a problem. The temple's been desecrated. It's no longer holy unto God. And so they have to rededicate the temple. In order to do that, they have to have the menorah, the 7-branched menorah burn for 8 days as part of the purification process. But they only have 1 day's worth of sanctified oil. And in order to make more sanctified oil, the menorah has to burn for 8 days. There's no solution. So they say the only thing we can do is just put the 1 day's oil we have, and that's all we can do. There's nothing else. So they put that 1 day's oil in the menorah, and it miraculously burns for 8 days, enough to purify the temple, and then to make more oil, and so on. That was such a tremendous miracle that the Jewish people have ever since celebrated that miracle of lights, which they call Hanukkah, or the Festival of the Lights. That then leads to that Maccabean, that family, which their name was Hasmoneah, was the last name actually of that family, Judas Maccabeus and his brothers. Some of them were killed in the battles, some went on. But that family, the Hasmonean family, then ruled for a number of generations. They weren't so hot either. Some of them were pretty evil. And we'll get into more of that in world history class. But eventually you get to the point where there are two brothers that are fighting over who should be the ruler over Israel. One of them is the older. He has the right to rule, but he doesn't really like it so much. His brother convinces him to give up, and so he does. But then there's a guy that comes up from the south in an area called Idumea, or the Edomites. The Edomites had moved over to this area in Idumea, and at one point the Hasmonean king had forced the Idumeans to become Jewish. Not because they wanted to or believed in Yahweh God, but they forced them to convert. Well, a guy that was living down in there saw an opportunity for some power. And so he came up and convinced the brother who had backed away, John Hyrcanus, that he was being taken advantage of by his brother and he should fight for it. And so they did. They went back to war between the two brothers. Well, nobody was winning. It was coming out of tie. And so this man from Idumea, whose name was Antipater, said, well, let's get a third party to decide who is the ruler over Israel. And at that time, a Roman general by the name of Pompey was in the area, expanding Roman territory. So Antipater asked Pompey to come and settle it. Well, I think Antipater probably had something to do with it, that Pompey picked John Hyrcanus to be the ruler, which sets off, some more difficulties as time goes on. But now Rome has become part of the mix of what's going on in Israel. And as time goes on, as Antipater dies, he's actually poisoned, but his sons are given positions of authority around Israel, and one of them, whose name is Herod, was given the governorship of Galilee. The other one, Phaziel, was given the governorship of Jerusalem, with John Hyrcanus as kind of the figurehead ruler of the whole area. Well, at a particular point, the brother that was cast out finds his way back from being imprisoned in Rome and joins together with a group of people from over in this area, which used to be Persia, now called Parthia, and they hate the Romans, and so they help him drive out the Roman presence in Jerusalem and Galilee. They capture Phaziel and are taking him back as a prisoner. Herod escapes and finally makes his way back to Rome to get help. Phaziel dies along the way. Most think he committed suicide. Herod doesn't think so. He thinks that the Parthians killed him. And so when he comes back with his Roman soldiers to drive the Parthians out, to drive Antigonus out, the other brother, and take over once again, and this time Rome has proclaimed Herod to be king. So we have a question here of how he became king, and that the answer to that is that the Roman Senate proclaimed him to be king or appointed him as king. All right, that is like 400 or 500 years condensed into 5 minutes. So Herod the Great, actually his mother was Jewish, so he had some Jewish blood. But what Herod the Great did then, in order to try to get the Jewish people on his side, since he wasn't really Jewish, was to marry a princess of the Hasmonean family, the family of the Maccabees. So he thought that that would be a good thing. People would then respect him. Unfortunately, he doesn't behave all that well towards them either, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. All right. So the question of how he got to be king is that he was appointed by the Romans. How many of you knew that he was appointed by the Roman Senate? Okay, good. How many of you had to look it up? How many of you remembered from world history, or at least look back in your world history notes? Okay, one person. All right. So glad we spent time on that world history that one person remembers. All right, so the next question, number 98. How many wise men came to find the Messiah? How many came? Well, let me ask you this first. According to our songs and our Christmas cards, how many came? Hold up your fingers. Yeah, we always thought, we three kings of Orient are, right? All right. According to the text, how many came? Nate, how many came did you have?
I have 3.
You put 3. Oh, he's looking at the Christmas cards, not at the Bible. What do you have, Emma?
I put that we don't know, but we speculate 3 because of the 3.
All right, the speculation is 3 because of 3 gifts. When you think about it, I guess you can understand why somebody might have thought that at one time. But have you ever gone to a birthday party where you and somebody else shared a gift? Your parents, when your parents go to a wedding, when you and your parents go to a wedding, do each one of you bring a gift? You have one gift for the family, right? So it is possible for there to be a gift from more than one person. Now, when you also consider the gifts that were given, again, oftentimes we picture them bringing like a little present. You know, here's a little bit of gold, a little bit of myrrh. No, the word that's used there for the containers of those gifts is the word that we might call in English treasure chests. So they brought treasure chests full of gold, a treasure chest full of myrrh, a treasure chest full of frankincense. That would be plenty for more than one person to bring.
I answered my own question.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Is there anything else? Anybody else might be interested
I
in?
was gonna ask, like, we learned about them going to the temple to sacrifice. They didn't have like enough like money and stuff to like do a normal sacrifice, but I forgot the wise men didn't get there till like 2 years later.
That's right. And a lot of people are confused by that. So we know that there were at least how many wise men? What's the very least there could have been? Nope, it's not 1.
2.
2. Why?
Because it says men.
It says men, plural. So there's at least 2. Is there an upper limit? No. And when I tell you who these wise men or magi were, you might agree with me that there were a lot more than 3. The Magi that came into Jerusalem looking for the king of the Jews that had just been born were of the same group that had invaded Jerusalem before. They were from Parthia. Now, knowing that Herod the Great considers them a great enemy, would they have tried to sneak into town with just 2 or 3 people? Probably not. My speculation is, and it's a speculation, I have to admit, with the amount of treasure that they were bringing and the situation that they found themselves, I would imagine they came with hundreds, not just 3. They may have been accompanied by a whole army. Who knows? Now, the interesting thing is, as we see Herod responding to them, you might wonder, well, why if Herod hated them so much, why didn't he take his army against them? Why does he act so nice toward them? Well, it just so happens, at the time when this occurs, Herod's army is out of town. He had sent them up to Syria to help the Romans put down an insurrection. So he's there in Jerusalem without his army, and I think this army of Parthian Magi come into town. And what are they looking for? Well, let's look at the next question here. Who were the wise men? Well, we can talk about that for a minute. And if you look up, or did you find anything about the wise men? Who were they? What were they?
Astronomers.
They were astronomers. What else?
They call them kingmakers.
Why? Now, in our song, it says they were kings. Were they kings? No, almost everything in that song is not historically accurate. It's a fun song, but it's wrong. They weren't kings, but they were among a group of people that were considered the intellectual ones, the scientific ones, the scientists of the Parthian Empire, the Persian Empire, the Babylonian Empire before that. They were the ones that were considered the elite, the top-notch people in the empire, to the extent that you could not be declared emperor or king without their approval. So they weren't kings, but they were kingmakers. They were the ones that determined who would be king in Persia or Babylon before that. All right, so what else? What else we know about the Magi? They were astronomers. What else were they? They were astrologers too, because they looked at the stars as indicating things, giving signs and so on. They were scientists. We could say they were chemists. They learned chemistry. Some of the tricks that they did to impress people, I imagine, were simply things they learned in chemistry. And what word do we have in our English language today that comes from them that indicates the kind of sleight of hand that they may have done? Magic. Magic comes from the Magi. And they even wore pointed hats, like sometimes you see magicians wear, with stars on it. Yeah, they wore that kind of thing. Okay, so that's the Magi. Magi were kingmakers. Interesting, isn't it, that they're coming looking for a king? All right. Number 100, research, remember, what was their probable mode of transportation? How did they get there? According to the Christmas cards and the songs and nativity sets, according to that, how did the Magi get there?
By camel.
By camels. All right, how many of you put camel down for your answer? You're afraid to put your hand up, aren't you? Because you know that must not be right. How did they get there?
Horses.
Horses. The Parthians live in a mountainous area. Have you ever seen camels in the mountains? No. They have a hard time in the mountains. But Persia is known for what? Its horses. It's known for the, have you heard of a Persian stallion? Yeah. In fact, I think that our American quarter horse is derived from the Persian stallions. If you're in world history, when we get to this part, I'll show you pictures of the Parthians in relation to horses. They were well known for their horses. So they came in on horseback. Just try to picture this. Maybe several hundred people coming in on horseback, Persian stallions coming into Jerusalem with all the pomp that they could muster. You know, a very regal gathering, and they're coming in, and they're they're looking for something, and let's see, is that a question we have? No. Okay, so what are they looking for? What do they say they're looking for?
Messiah.
They don't say that. What do they say?
They're looking for the Christ.
They don't say that either. That would be the same as Messiah. What did they say?
They're looking for he who was been born king of the Jews.
They want to know, where's the one who was born king of the Jews? Now, let me ask you something. Why would that upset Herod the Great?
Because he was supposedly the king of the Jews. Because he was the leader of the Jews.
Because he was the king of the Jews. And was he born king of the Jews? He was appointed. Which has a higher place? Which has precedence? One who was born to a position or one who was appointed to a position?
Born.
One who's born. So Herod knows if there's someone who was born king of the Jews, that takes him off the throne. Now, Herod did not like the idea of anybody taking his throne. In fact, he killed several of his own sons because he thought that they were going to try to take the throne. He killed the wife that he had married that was a Hasmonean princess because he thought she was going to try to get him off the throne, as well as his mother-in-law, as well as his brother-in-law. He killed a lot of people, and so the idea of there being another king upset him greatly. And you can see, and if you look at the text, that not only is Herod upset, but it says all Jerusalem was upset too. Why? Because when Herod gets upset, people die. So everybody in Jerusalem is all upset, all on edge, because Herod is unhappy. What's going to happen? All right, you get a picture of the situation here? So why is Herod so fearful of them? Well, I mentioned before, I think they had a large entourage, and Herod's army was out of town at the time. All right, so let's look at the, well, let's see, one more thing we did not mention. How did the Magi know that a king had been born in Israel? How did the Magi know? Somebody send them a telegram? It's on Facebook. How did they know that a king had been born in Israel? Are you reading the text or just looking for answers? Let's read the text. Somebody should remember. Lexi. They saw a star rising in the east. Now, in world history, we go into a lot of detail looking at what that star was. We're not going to do that here. Let me recommend to anyone who might be watching this is not taking world history that an excellent video has been produced that I think really nails down what the star was. And it's called the Star of Bethlehem. The man who did the research used a computer program which enables you to look at the night sky any place in the world, any time in history. And by the way, that can only be done because God set in motion everything mathematically. Everything's based on math in the universe. And because, and this is something that Kepler discovered, and that is that everything is moving at a certain rate, a certain pace, so that stars and planets cross each other. It's predictable when they will and when they did. So they saw a conjunction of planets, basically, which they call a star. And they knew that. Now, how did they know that this conjunction of planets, which takes place within the constellation Leo, which is symbolic of Judah, and it's a combination of the regal planet Jupiter and Regula, the king star, those things coming together? How did they know that that meant a king had been born in Israel? Where did they get the information that they should even look for something like that?
It was prophesied.
And how would they know that? It's prophesied in the Old Testament, but how would they know that? They're not in Israel, and they're not Hebrew. They're living over in Persia. Was there anyone with whom they came in contact that might have told them centuries before? It was passed on down. Daniel. We're told that Daniel was chief of the Magi. He was the head guy. Do you think he might have told the Magi the prophecies about the coming of the king? Yeah. And so that was passed down for generations. And so they knew what to look for. I imagine they were looking at this, from generation to generation, they were looking at the sky to see whether this might be the time when that new king would be born. And so they come into Jerusalem looking for the one who has been born, King of the Jews. Because they saw the star. They saw what they've been looking for a long, long time. The evidence that this new king had been born. And they have come to worship him. Now, not only worship him in the sense that he is the Messiah, he is God in flesh. I don't know if they understood that or not. But they certainly were looking for someone to be a leader. Because the leader they had at that time was not willing to fight against the Romans. He was willing to kind of let things slide. But the Magi wanted to keep the Romans from invading that territory. And so they're looking for the king of Israel to fulfill that role. All right, number 102. You were to list 3 differences between the shepherds and the Magi. So give me one difference. What do you have, Sean?
Shepherds were poor, Magi were rich.
Yeah, very good. Okay, what else? Sam?
Magi brought gifts.
Right, and shepherds didn't, right? Okay, Emma?
The shepherds were told by an angel and the Magi.
And then so when we contrast, we got to do the full thing. One is one thing, and the other is the other. So the shepherds were told by angels, the Magi by a star, essentially. They're told by a star through Daniel. Daniel had told them, and then they saw the star. Okay, what else?
The shepherds were present at the birth, and the Magi were present afterwards.
Okay, so the Magi were there. Some think as much as maybe 2 years later. I think the time frame is more like a year, within a year. If we look at what happens in the stars. What else, Joel?
The shepherds knew where to go.
The shepherds knew where to go. Good. Because they didn't have to ask, did they? We talked about that. They knew the place that the Messiah was to come. The Magi knew where to go as far as Jerusalem, because that's the logical place where the king of Israel will be born, right? But once they got to Jerusalem, where did they go? Where did they go in Jerusalem? Assuming that's the place where the king would be born.
Yeah.
To the palace. Yeah, where the king lives, right? When you assume that's where the king would be born.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why they asked Herod, where's the one born king of the Jews? You have him upstairs in a bedroom someplace? And so Herod has to find out from the scholars, where is the Messiah supposed to be born? And so he directs them to Bethlehem. And then we notice that as they leave Jerusalem, the star reappears. By the way, they didn't follow a star all the way from Persia to Jerusalem. Again, that's another one of the misinformation that we have about the Magi. They saw the conjunction of planets, but then it ceased. They come to Jerusalem, and as they're leaving Jerusalem, suddenly the conjunction is back, and it moves. And if you watch the video of the star in Bethlehem, you'll see why this happens, or how it happens. And it moves toward Bethlehem. And so they go down, and they find then the child and Mary and Joseph there. And there's another difference maybe we come to there today. And if you put a difference as to where the shepherds and the Magi found Jesus?
The Magi entered into a house, or the shepherds went into the tower.
Yeah, or a cave. So the shepherds went into a cave, the Magi went into a house. Okay, other differences. Jonas?
Magi came from far away and the shepherds just went over.
Good. Yeah, shepherds were real close by. Magi from far away. Good. Any other differences? Yeah, you could go down to as much as, what kind of animals were around. Shepherds were around sheep. The Magi had horses. It's kind of a small thing. But anyone else? Any other differences? All right, if you had 3 differences, I will count that as 3 points. All right, now number 103, 2 similarities between the shepherds and the Magi. 2 similarities. Give me one, Kayla.
They're both called Sheep Out the Baby Jesus by God.
They both what?
They're both called Sheep Out the Baby Jesus.
They were both called to
Seek out.
I'll
the baby.
seek out, all right, Jesus. But let's be clear. When the Magi get there, he's no longer a baby. In fact, the word that's used in the Greek is a different word. It's not the word baby; it's the word toddler, basically. And it could be used from anything from a toddler on up. But it's a word. There's not an infant. I guess we might consider a 1-year-old or 2-year-old a baby in a sense, but no longer an infant, at least. Okay, so they're both seeking. They're both told to seek for Jesus. What's another similarity? Luke?
Both new prophecies, like the prophecies of
Good. They both knew prophecies that led them to believe that they would find this king or this Messiah. What else, Jonas?
They both came to worship him.
Good. They both came to worship him. Brenna?
They are both welcome in the Lord's kingdom.
They both welcome.
Are welcome in the Lord's kingdom.
They both are welcome in the Lord's kingdom. Okay, now that's a good point. Because what does that tell us about the kingdom of God? It's from the lowest and also people that aren't Jewish. All right, we'll continue with this on Monday.